We have two more events coming up in the next 2 weeks. On November 5th, we have a panel of alumni in the medical field and one of our pharmacy professors discussing their experiences with the COVID-19 pandemic. And our event on November 10th focuses on the 2020 election. You can find these events on our alumni events webpage. This first event, however, is a conversation that will help us no matter what our circumstances are. We're going to spend some time with an alum who is actively sharing the tools they've developed as someone who is leading a principled, productive, and compassionate life that is improving the human condition. Matt Guynn, class of '95, is Director of Church and Community Organizing with On Earth Peace. He also serves as a member of the online training team for Training for Change, working with U.S. and global social change groups. Matt has served on the coordinating committee for the Oregon Poor People's Campaign since 2018. Since 2013, he's worked with the team to offer advanced online education in Kenyan nonviolence. In 2019, Matt co-edited the book, Resist, Organize, Transform, An Introduction to Nonviolence and Activism with Joan May Cordova, Dean Johnson, and Regina Shan Stoltzfus. He attended Manchester University, later earning an MA in International Peace Studies from the University of Notre Dame and an MA in Theology from Bethany Theological Seminary. He lives in Portland, Oregon with his wife, Sarah Kinsel, and sons, Daniel and Owen. Let's all give Matt a warm Manchester welcome.
Hello, everybody. Hello. I'm going to start my screen sharing. And so here we are, nonviolence in a polarized time. I'm going to ask you, if you have not already done so, to rename yourself to whatever you'd like to be called during this session. We're going to be talking with each other a little bit. And so if you can also add your location and your pronouns, I know that we're all over the place in terms of being in North Manchester and all around the world. So I'm connecting from Portland, Oregon. You can rename yourself by clicking over your own video feed or opening up your participants menu and doing that. And I see some people changing their name right now. I will invite you to go ahead and turn your video on for this call so that we can see each other, but it's just an invitation. Please go to your chat bar, which you can find chat at the bottom of your Zoom navigation bar. There's an option to open up chat and share one place that you've experienced polarization in your life or community, a breakdown of communication across lines of difference. Please go ahead and open up your chat and take a moment to respond. Maddie says, my high school. Sue says, in my neighborhood. Let's see what else you've got. Kyla says, my high school. My landscaping summer internship, says Haley. Family gatherings, political conversations with families and friends. Chris says, my college town. Church conferences from Becca. Haley in North Manchester, will you come off mute and say something about the polarization in your landscaping summer internship?
So, yes, can you hear me?
Yes, thanks.
Okay. So this past summer, my internship was outside. It was kind of dealing more with like agriculture and horticulture, and that's something I'm interested in. And there was a lot of males. So me being the only female in that internship was definitely kind of an eye-opening experience.
Thanks, Haley. We've got some more showing up here. Workplace, more high school travel soccer club. Okay. Thank you. I'm going to stop my screen sharing for a moment. And so as we get started, I want to say welcome to everyone who's here. I want to say welcome to students and alum and faculty and staff of Manchester and friends and supporters and allies. I want to welcome you to this session on nonviolence if you're feeling hopeful today, or if you're feeling despairing, or if you're just feeling numb. I want to welcome you if you might be voting in your first presidential election, or if you're voting in your 15th presidential election. I did the math, and I think there's at least someone here who might be voting in their 15th. I want to welcome you if you are someone who is more of a rebel, or someone who just goes with the flow a little bit, whether you like to speak up or it's hard for you to find your voice sometimes. I want to welcome athletes and scientists in training and liberal arts majors and people who are working and people who are retired. I want to welcome people who identify as activists or who identify as an informed citizen, or maybe you're not sure, or maybe you feel apathetic about it all. And finally, I want to welcome the people who are just here for the VIA credit. Welcome. Just keeping it real. We'll try for this not to be too painful for you. My purposes are to invite you to commit or to recommit to be a force for nonviolence wherever you find yourself in life. In this session, I will provide a brief introduction to On Earth Peace, the nonprofit organization that I work with, and we'll explore together a little bit about what nonviolence means and a particular approach to nonviolence that's called Kingian nonviolence, which is the methodology and philosophy of Martin Luther King Jr. Within that, we'll consider one skill called dialectical thinking. So let me tell you a little bit about On Earth Peace. When I was a student at Manchester, I had an internship with On Earth Peace. The year was 1993, and my project for the summer was developing a resource file on nonviolence training in the United States. So it was pretty fitting, and it helped me along on my path. Here is a little bit about who On Earth Peace is now and some of our commitments. The vision that On Earth Peace brings is a world in beloved community, liberated from oppression, violence, and war. Here are some of our values. Here are our core values: Jesus-centered spirituality, positive peace, anti-racism, anti-oppression, intergenerational leadership, and beloved community. And here's our mission. You know, your vision is your big vision of how the world could be different. And your mission is what you choose within that your organization focuses on. So our mission is to develop and walk with leaders and communities who work for justice and peace. So what are some examples of that? Walking with leaders and communities who work for justice and peace. For example, walking with our interns as they grow as social change professionals. Walking with people in our current Kingian Nonviolence certification program, where we've been strategizing this week in our class to support people in Kentucky and Illinois and Nigeria who are resisting policies related to police involvement in the community and police violence. We've been strategizing this week to support people in New England and people in Australia who are working to resist power plants using coal and pressing to convert to clean energy. And a participant in India who's working on refugee and self-determination issues. I'm here today as an organizer and as a minister, looking for people who are ready to hear a call to active commitment to nonviolence. No matter your profession or your hoped for profession, no matter your age or your status or education, your gender identity or income level, whatever your racial or cultural background or any previous experience. So, here is a little bit more about how you could be involved with On Earth Peace. On Earth Peace has a very active internship program. It was rebooted 6 or 7 years ago. It's a paid internship program. We currently have 20 interns. This picture is one batch of all Manchester interns. We've had 9 Manchester interns in the last 7 or 8 years. And here are the eligibility requirements. So on the call, tell me if these apply to you. And please go to, in your participant menu, at the bottom of your participant menu, there's a place where you can check yes or no. So please tell me, using the yes or no at the bottom of your participant menu, whether these eligibility requirements apply to you. Young adults, age 18 to 24, current college and graduate students, regardless of age, and recent graduates who begin their internship within 1 year of graduating. Do you have that option? Yes and no in this Zoom at the bottom of your participant menu? You open up participants in the navigation bar, and then at the bottom of the list there, it'll have a yes and no green check mark. I can't see it. Maybe this Zoom option doesn't have that activated. So raise hand. Yeah, you could try raise hand. Thanks, Katie. So raise your hand if these eligibility requirements apply to you. Excellent. So I'm seeing at least 20 people here who are potential On Earth Peace interns. There you go. And here's a link that I'm putting into chat that will allow you to get more information about On Earth Peace's internship program. So we have opportunities both for people who are interested in nonprofit administration, communications, development, those kinds of nonprofit life, running a nonprofit positions, and people who are interested in organizing around particular issues. So hope that you will consider applying for an internship with On Earth Peace. I think I want to dive in here. And so I want to ask you to go to your chat and to share with me, what are some signs that we're living in polarized times? You can go ahead and lower those hands. Thank you. What are some signs that we're living in polarized times? Masks, no masks. The inability of individuals to debate issues peacefully. Segregated communities.
That is further metabolized too. But first of all, what is an erythrocyte? Well, you should have correctly said that an erythrocyte is a mature red blood cell.
Let's see. I'm going to remute. There you go. Thanks. Common, strong, opinionized people. Sarah Eberly, will you come off mute and say what you mean by that? I'm going to continue adding some of these to our screen. Okay. A heightened dislike of people that we don't agree with. Okay. people not respecting each other on social media and in person because of different beliefs. Excellent. So here's my next question is, or the next thing I'd like to ask you to do is raise your hand. What does it feel like to be living in polarized times? What does it feel like to be living in polarized times? And there's some people that still have their hands up from before. You can lower them or leave them up if you'd like to share. Please raise your hand. What does it feel like to be living in polarized times? Bailey, I see your hand up. Will you come off mute and talk to us?
It's a little frustrating, I would say.
Thanks. Can you give us one more sentence? What's frustrated, or what's that feel like?
It's just
What's
frustrating, because like everybody's always conflicting all the time, and there's like, feels like nowadays especially that like there's no middle ground. People like don't respect each other.
There's no middle ground and people don't respect each other. Thanks, Bailey. I see one other hand up right now, which is Haley. Maybe that was up from before. I see Kyla. Will you share with us, Kyla?
I just want to say thank you for saying my name right, first of all. Second of all, it's very tiring. It's like no one can have any civilized conversations anymore without everyone arguing about a certain subject, especially when it comes to politics and all the recent things with racial injustice and all of that. So I think that it's hard for people to understand, and I definitely see people more closed-minded than I used to since all this recent stuff has came about as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I see FM Kaba 2022 in chat says, it means always watching your back and being mindful of what you get to say and at what time, because everyone is so sucked with their own belief system. And Elena, it makes me feel disconnected from my community. Like I have to be very careful about what I say to someone whose political opinions I'm unaware of. Thank you. Thanks for the people who've been sharing in chat and for those who raised your hand to speak out loud. There we go. So, what are we seeing here? I'm going to go back in time to when other people worked on issues in other kinds of polarized times. What are we seeing here? You can raise your hand, you can answer in chat. So this is a map of educational segregation in the United States prior to the 1954 Supreme Court decision, Brown versus the Board of Education. So fairly polarized, would you say? Like, and just what this represents in terms of what life was like in the United States for people of African descent and for European Americans 60, 70 years ago. Can someone raise your hand and tell me what we're seeing in this slide? Maddie.
Rosa Parks.
Okay. And does someone have an idea? Like, Maddie, can you say a little bit more about Rosa Parks?
She decided to sit where she wasn't allowed to sit on the bus because she was Black.
Thanks. Tina, I see you had your hand up. Do you want to add something to the story?
Oh, I don't need to, but I can. 381 days is how long the Montgomery bus boycott lasted. So people were committed to it for the long haul. And it was pretty impressive, massive, organized strike, boycott.
Excellent. Thank you. So 381 days. Imagine having the discipline to be at anything for 381 days in a row, let alone the growing numbers of the African-American community in Montgomery walking instead of riding the bus. So they were exemplifying a nonviolence approach. And so I'd like to take us to the next place in our conversation by asking us to explore, what do we even mean when we say the word nonviolent? So what's the difference between these two words? Could someone raise your hand and share what you think the difference is between these two words? Kyla, did you want to respond?
Yeah, so nonviolence is a way of dealing with things, obviously, that does not include in violence, so in peaceful ways. As an example, for the most recent things with the whole DML protests, it is nice to do a protest without harming anything, but the riots are a different situation. So nonviolence is definitely where you just try to approach things in a way that isn't harmful towards anything or anybody.
Okay. What do you think is the difference between this non-hyphen violence and nonviolence, all one word? Does someone have an idea?
So I think with the hyphen one, it's kind of more as affirmative action, or like kind of more powerful, I would say, than the one below.
Okay, so in the way that we understand it in Kingian nonviolence, that hyphen it makes a difference. And what that hyphen is, it's like saying not violent. And when you think about, you see a report about a protest on the news and they say, well, there was a protest, it was not violent, it was non-violent. Usually when they're using the word in reporting, like in reporting, news reporting, what they're talking about is, did any windows get broken? And so this approach of non-hyphen violence is, I didn't hit anybody, I'm non-violent. In Kingian nonviolence, we say that nonviolence is actually so much more than that. It's a great place to start to say, I'm not going to hit anybody. But actually this nonviolence, all one word, which still is not the best term for it. And maybe someone here on the call will come up with a better word that we can use for the next 50 years. But we're still kind of stuck with it. Nonviolence, all one word, is a way of life. It's a commitment to engage the underlying issues using creativity and even at cost to ourselves. So here's a little bit more about what I mean by nonviolence, or in what we're talking about when we talk about Kingian nonviolence. So the approach that I'm talking about today is called Kingian nonviolence. First of all, why call it Kingian instead of something else, instead of just nonviolence? So we call this Kingian nonviolence because it's rooted in a particular era. And it's not just about Martin Luther King, but it's also about Rosa Parks and Septima Clark and Ella Baker and Dorothy Cotton and so many other men and women who were leaders in the Black-led freedom struggle. We call it Kingian because we're a part of reclaiming the actual heritage of Martin Luther King, who today is seen kind of like a Black Santa Claus. Like everybody loves Martin Luther King today. In the time of his life, he was a disturber of the peace who had been arrested time after time for going up against the authorities. So we also call it Kingian because we're trying to retrieve the actual heritage of Martin Luther King. Kingian nonviolence is a philosophy and a methodology. So in Kingian nonviolence, we study Dr. King's speeches and books, but we also consider the possibility of becoming a practitioner of nonviolence. And so I know we're all on mute, but I invite you to just try that phrase out for yourself. I am a practitioner of nonviolence. Just try it out. I'm seeing some mouths moving. Okay, that's good. That's good. I like it. Thanks, Virginia, for coming along with me. All right. Kingian nonviolence is a way of approaching conflict. I don't know about you, but I'm from Indiana and I was raised in the church and I love to avoid conflict. Maybe it's true for you too. And so I kind of consider myself a recovering conflict avoider. Kingian nonviolence says that instead of sweeping conflict under the rug, we wage conflict as a tool to right wrongs and to restore relationships and to work for reconciliation. Kingian nonviolence is also a way that we approach organizing. You might recognize that a lot of organizing that happens is built on a foundation of us versus them thinking, in which we vilify our opponents who are bad people doing bad things. And so, of course, we love to hate them. In Kingian nonviolence, we see our job being to connect with people all across the community, not just to like run a long us versus them kind of game. And in the process, holding out the possibility that we may even win our opponents or our adversaries to our side. So instead of getting stuck in us versus them thinking, we take responsibility for organizing a wide categories of people in the community and holding out the possibility that even our opponents may come to our side. I'm going to look at my chat and I'd like to hear from you. What stands out to you from these 4 pillars of Kingian nonviolence? What hits you today? Chris, I saw you said how we approach organizing. Will you come off mute and say something about what stood out to you or how that hits with your own experience?
Yeah, sure. So I think that oftentimes, like especially with the recent Black Lives Matter protests, like in certain areas, there's been a tendency to just think of it as something that's in the moment, something that you do once and that you never do again. Whereas with Kingian nonviolence, you see it more as a long-term struggle. So
Yes.
Yeah, so that's kind of how I see it.
Yes, beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much. Several people noticing an approach to conflict. Lau, thanks for also confessing to being a conflict avoider. Excellent. So one of the core teachings in Kingian nonviolence is Dr. King's 6 principles of Kingian nonviolence. He first articulated these in the book that he wrote after the Montgomery bus boycott. That's called Stride Towards Freedom. And so we're going to take just a few minutes right now and look at these 6 principles. Oops, come back to me. These 6 principles of Kingian nonviolence. And I'm going to call on a few people randomly, so be ready for your mute because I'm going to ask you to read these out. And When I call on you to read it out, I'm going to ask you to read it and then add a sentence about what that could possibly mean. Okay? So be ready. I see Roger Eberly. Roger, will you read number 1 and give us one sentence about what that principle could be?
Nonviolence is a way of life for courageous people. Nonviolence is not something just easy and going with the flow. It takes a lot of courage to stand in nonviolent ways. Thanks,
Roger. One of the things I've appreciated so much in the Kingian context is that this doesn't necessarily mean you have to be courageous to commit to it, but sometimes it means when you commit to it and you're with your people who are on the road towards justice, that's where you get your courage. So sometimes the courage comes. Let's see, someone, number 2, I will say Melanie Harmon.
So the beloved community is the framework for the future. And
what do you think that might mean?
Well, I think community is extremely important in the world that we're living in right now. And I think that we need to have a strong community to build a framework for the future. We can't build it alone.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Could someone raise their hand who's ready to read any of the rest of these, just so I'm not picking at total random? Raise your hand if you're ready to go. Monica, I see you're ready for number 3. And anybody else who's ready to read, just go ahead and line up so we can keep it moving. Monica, do number 3 for us, please.
Attack forces of evil, not persons doing evil. So work on the system instead of getting into one-on-one attacks with different individuals.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Haley, you're up for number 4.
Accept suffering without retaliation for the sake of the cause to achieve the goal. So I would say accept where you are to help build for the future generation.
Thank you, Haley. It might cost us something to build the world that we want to build. Number 5, I'm looking for 2 more hands raised to read out 5 and 6. Kendall.
Avoid internal violence of the spirit as well as external physical violence. So avoid something that's going to hurt you emotionally or mentally as well as physically.
Thank you. Thank you. That, we talked back at the beginning about non-violence as saying, well, I'm not going to hit people. And there's a deeper level of commitment is that you cannot hit, but you can still hate them. And one of my colleagues in Kingian training, Kazu Haga, likes to repeat the slogan, hating someone else is like drinking poison and expecting them to die. So hating someone else is like drinking poison and expecting them to die. So in this, there's personal development work that's required of us along this path. So Elena, will you do number 6 for us?
The universe is on the side of justice. To me, this examples are where no matter how long it took, dictators have not succeeded, or God has always been with those who are being oppressed.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Elena, and thanks everyone who read aloud. So these 6 principles are what we call the will of Kingian nonviolence. So that means it's like the undergirding, it gives us the strength. And there's more than we're doing in this hour or hour plus a few minute session in Kingian nonviolence about the skill and about how we organize. But for this session on living in polarized times, what I would like to pick up is that Dr. King was a dialectical thinker. And let me make sure that I've got the next right slide up here. Here we go. Slide 39. So here's your basic introduction to dialectical thinking. Someone has an idea, the thesis. Another opposing idea arises to that, the antithesis. And sometimes that's where we get caught. We get caught in what I think versus what you think. And what Dr. King tried to work at in his writings and in the organizing that was happening in the movement was listening to different perspectives and trying to analyze the threads of truth that were within them in order to build a synthesis. So that task of analysis is what permits a synthesis. So Dr. King looked at violence and he looked at pacifism. And so if we look at violence, we can say, well, there are some pieces of that. People who are committed to violence in behalf of their cause are willing to engage. They're willing to risk. They're militant. They're like, I'm gonna do it. But they also kill or destroy. On the other hand, Dr. King looked at pacifism. And those of us who are connected to the Church of the Brethren on this call or with Manchester, we've had our own journeys finding the limits of pacifism. Pacifism values life. That's great. It has a commitment to not kill or harm. And it often stays uninvolved. Pacifism can be non-violent and not putting your hand to the plow of building the future. And so what we do in dialectical thinking is that we try to weave together those threads of truth. So we take a moment to analyze what is worthwhile in the opposing view, or what are some different characteristics and qualities, and then see how we could weave those apparently opposing views into a synthesis. So I'm going to stop there and see if there are any questions or comments. You could raise your hand. You could also write in chat. Okay, we're going to do a little practice, and we're scaling it way back from like this is a practice. So like we're not trying to solve all the problems of the world today. I'm sorry if you came for that. Maybe you'll get that in the next alumni series presentation. But so I want you to join me in doing dialectical thinking between two people who want to hang out together, but one of them really wants to play basketball and the other one really wants to relax. So what are some of the things that might be true for someone who's trying to play basketball, who wants to play basketball? And what are some of the things that might be true for someone who wants to relax? So we're looking for some of the threads of truth. So think about it. If you're one of those people who likes to play basketball, what are some of the things about that experience that you love? Raise your hand, throw it in chat. We're doing an experiment here. Love for the game, it's energetic. Let's see. Get on my correct slide here. There we go. Energetic. Okay. Competition. Okay. Strategy. Camaraderie. Boy, that's a good one. All right, what other? Physical activity. Okay. Engagement with others. Hiding behind my circle there. Okay, someone who wants to relax, like what is the essence of that? What are some elements of relaxing? What is that like? Thanks for joining me in this experiment. Quiet, peace, de-stressing, focus, focused attention, recharging after a long week. Solo could be. And there's some others in chat. Now, let's imagine that we're two people who are trying to find something to do together. What is a synthesis? What are some elements of each that we might be able to draw in? And what are some activities that might satisfy both people? Here's one of the things about this approach to dialectical thinking and synthesis is that synthesis isn't compromise. Compromise is you both get a little of what you want, but not everything. And so what we're aiming for is people getting like something that they both feel like they're excited about, not that both people are like 75% okay. So play with me a little bit. What could it be? Okay. Melanie says yoga. Yoga could be a synthesis. Melanie, will you come off mute and tell us how could that be a synthesis?
Well, because I think a lot of people exercise yoga as a form of relaxation, but yet, you know, for those that like the engagement with others, you could certainly practice yoga with a class or with your best friend or and there's certainly strategy into practicing yoga. So it's a combination.
Okay. Thanks, Melanie. Let's see, we've got playing video game basketball. Janine, how does that satisfy a synthesis? Will you come off mute and tell us?
Well, you're getting to play basketball, but you're also getting to do it in a quiet, peaceful, de-stressing way.
Depends on how loud the volume is on the video game.
Right.
Playing games at home inside Chris. How does that incorporate some of these threads of truth?
Yeah, sure. So with the games, you would get the energy, the competition. Like for example, Jenga, it's like it can get really competitive playing it, but then you are still like disconnecting from life's problems. So.
Thank you so much. Here is one synthesis that a training group that I was working with a couple of weeks ago did on basketball and relax. They came up with sea kayaking, saying that it's cooperating and bonding, it's building strength and skill together, like winning together against the elements and builds confidence. And it's active, but it's also relaxing and restorative in a beautiful natural space. So I'm gonna ask you to step out of our little experiment for a minute and share with me in the chat, like, what's it like to try this dialectical thinking as a discipline of nonviolence? And now I know there's a bunch of y'all who are on the other screens of Zoom who never turned on your video. Maybe you're here or not. Maybe you're playing video basketball game right now. I'm not sure. but I'm seeing about the same 15 people participating a lot. So come on in. Kate says, it's very helpful and allows me to work on my compromising skills. Tina, it's fun to learn to think in a different way to find common ground. It's hopeful, okay? Powerful and smart for nonviolence. Eye-opening and brings some new perspective and voice. It avoids us, them thinking. It's easy to see it when it's written out. So if you have that map, you can sit down and kind of like hash it out with your friend or your community member or yourself. If you're having a fight with yourself, maybe you could try dialectical thinking with your own self. It gives me ideas for the negotiation stage when staging a revolution. All right, Chris. All right. That is one of the places that dialectical thinking comes into practice in actual organizing, is that we're negotiating with people about things we're trying to accomplish. And how do we do it in a way that synthesizes their truth as well as ours, instead of only imposing our truth over theirs? It doesn't mean undercutting our truth, but it means bringing them both into some kind of a synthesis. So now I'm going to ask you to brainstorm with me some polarities that we experience in society right now. And I'm going to put one on the left and one on the right. Like, I'm going to tell me the thesis and the antithesis. And we're not going to try and solve these today, but after this session, you might choose to identify some of the threads of truth within them. So we've got from Maddie, pro-life, pro-choice. Okay, we've got Republican versus Democrat. We've got Black lives and we've got blue lives. Immigrant, native born, the 1% versus the 99%. Mask and no mask. So right now, just so you already started on it, I want to ask you to take out a piece of paper and to draw this little diagram and to choose one of those or another one that you're really wrestling with right now. We're not going to take time to finish the whole thing right now in this session, but just draw this. You got the thesis and the antithesis. It looks like they're a polarity and they're stuck. Choose one of them and start writing your descriptors. Like, so what are some of the threads of truth under each one of them? If you're really feeling that mask versus no mask, maybe you choose that one. Your lived experience is native born versus immigrant. You see that conflict in your community. Maybe you choose that one. And just take 1 minute and start brainstorming a few of those threads of truth on each side. In the chat, we have capitalist versus communism, religious versus non-religious. Take about 30 more seconds. Someone who's doing the activity, would you be willing to raise your hand and just tell us, like, what is it like to try and think this way about a particular thing that you see in your life? You don't even have to tell us the specifics or the synthesis you're coming up with, but just tell us, like, what's it like to lift this particular set of weights? Maddie, I see your hand.
I'm just like thinking through it, and I'm like, well, some of the compromises that I make, like, some people wouldn't be okay with. Like nothing will ever be like perfect.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Can you say a couple more sentences about that, Maddie? I'm not sure I quite understood.
Like, I chose pro-life and pro-choice, and I was like, it's like babies not having a choice, like if they get, but women need to have a choice too. Like, what compromise could you make with that situation?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you can't really
Thanks,
make a
Maddie.
compromise with that. Everyone's just gonna have their own opinions.
Kind of along the lines of what Maddie was just saying, Chris says in chat, when it affects me personally, it's difficult to disentangle the idea and the person from harm I may have experienced. So Dr. King had a research committee, as it was called. That was a group of like 15 or 20 people that would get together at different places in the country, in the South or in the North, who didn't agree with each other. Like they were not all like just yes people, just like whatever you want, Dr. King. They actively disagreed with each other about the best way forward in the movement. And Dr. King would just sit in the corner of the room and listen to them dispute with each other about how the movement could develop. Not looking for one position to win over the other one, but looking deeper within for threads of truth. And so I wonder, in the same way that we were talking about nonviolence as a way of life for courageous people, but sometimes that happens collectively, maybe this dialectical thinking also is a collective practice. Like, we can help each other find threads of truth in opposing viewpoints. We're getting close to the end of our time together, and I would like to ask you, you know, I said at the beginning that I'm here as an organizer. I'm here as a minister, and I'm looking for people who want to make this commitment or recommit to nonviolence in your own life and to being a part of nonviolent social change work and to nonviolence as a discipline interpersonally in your communication with your friends and family. So part of what helps us do that is to think about what are our spheres of influence. Like, where is the place that you could take this dialectical thinking tool and apply it? Is it a conflict on campus? Is it a conflict in your office? Is it a conflict up there at Timbercrest where you're having a conflict with other people on the hallway? So I want to ask you to put in the chat, what are some of your spheres of influence? That's interesting. Sue said, my other side list is very small. I'm uninformed. And actually in Kingian Nonviolence, we talk about, we did the 6 steps. I mean, we did the 6 principles today, which are the will, and the 6 steps of Kingian Nonviolence start with information gathering. So I think you're probably not the only person, Sue, who doesn't yet know everything you could know about what's true for people on the other side from you. So come into chat with me and share with me, what are some of your spheres of influence? I'm not talking about something big and fancy. I'm talking about the people that you hang out with, the people that you naturally touch, the people that you're in relationship with, even if it's sometimes a little distant. My church community, says Lauren. Social media, says Vanessa. Professional colleagues, my cross-country and track teams, colleagues, family and coaches, my co-workers, soccer team, tennis team, parents, co-workers, family, my biological family and my local logical family, peers, family and friends, family members. So accepting the call to commit to nonviolence means something about those spheres of influence that you just named. It means something about how you show up and operate. What would it be like to take a commitment to nonviolence into those spaces and those communities? What would it be like to try out dialectical thinking the next time your group gets stuck? On the day that he was assassinated, Martin Luther King was talking with Bernard Lafayette Jr., who was one of his lieutenants and who later was one of the people who codified the Kingian nonviolence approach as a curriculum. And in that last conversation, they were talking about what were the next steps in the work they were doing. They were embroiled in a labor campaign with the sanitation workers in Memphis. And they were talking about, where does this go from here? And what Dr. King said to Dr. Lafayette was, what we need to do is to institutionalize and to internationalize nonviolence. Now, and that word institutionalize just really stays with me. What does it mean in our institutions to bring in the principles and practices of nonviolence in concrete and specific ways? And so I want to invite you to hear those final marching orders from Dr. King in terms of institutionalizing and internationalizing nonviolence, becoming part of the global movement for justice and peace and nonviolence and democracy. And in whatever institution you're a part of, working to help build beloved community as the framework for the future shapes how you see yourself. It shapes how you see the people you love, the folks that you don't love, that you have a hard time loving. It shapes even the way that you see your opponent. Having a commitment to being a beloved community builder or an institutionalizer of nonviolence means that no matter how bad things are in the moment, you have a place to stand to imagine a different future. So if it's possible that no one has called you yet or invited you into this millennia-long task of binding up the broken and the brokenhearted, including care for your own bruised spirit, if no one has invited you to join the struggle for justice, democracy, and nonviolence in our lifetimes, if no one has invited you to speak up when it's time for someone to speak up, you know when that moment is in your own life. I'm here to offer that invitation. How will you seek your full human potential in these polarized times? Will you accept the invitation to commit or recommit to nonviolence and all that it might bring to you? Whatever your job or your salary or your background, whatever profession you imagine for yourself, I hope there's a pre-pharmacist here on the call. Will you commit or recommit to leading for nonviolence wherever you are? My question isn't rhetorical. Will you commit yourself to building beloved community wherever you go? Onward, together. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Matt. And thank you everybody for joining today, our alumni, our students, our friends, everybody. Thank you so much for the interactive conversation. As a reminder, Matt is available by email if you have any further questions that you'd like to ask. His email is mguynn@onearthpeace.org. So if you need that, I can put it in the chat, or you can email the alumni office to get you that information as well. But lastly, like Michael said earlier in the conversation, our virtual fall series, we have a few other events coming up. So next week we have on November 5th at 7:30, our COVID first responder panel-led discussion that will focus on our individual experiences throughout the pandemic. And then on November 10th, we will have an educated discussion on understanding the election, and that's on November 10th at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. So again, thank you everybody for participating and for attending. I hope that you all have a wonderful evening.